All right, hello, guys. Today we are talking about why mountaineers cannot rely on CrossFit or other high intensity training as the answer to their preparations, and why you really do need to value low to moderate training in your preparations if you really do want to maximize your potential as a mountaineer. So high intensity training really does seem like an amazing shortcut for many mountaineers out there. Now, traditionally, mountaineers are recommended that they need long periods of endurance work throughout their week to properly get ready for a mountain. So this requires multiple hours of cycling, of running, of hiking every single week, multiple times a week to really get themselves ready. And obviously this comes with a massive time commitment, and many people just simply struggle to fit this in. Whether you have a super busy job, whether you've got a young family, or whether you've just got other things going on, trying to live like an endurance athlete is tough. And on the other side of this are people who aren't coming from an endurance background, who might be a bit more into team sports or strength training, and they're leading into a mountaineering lifestyle. They might just be completely bored with this type of training, and they might really hate just doing multiple hours of lower intensity stuff. And so the argument goes is if you can do this type of higher intensity training in which what you work really hard for a much shorter period of time, you can potentially get the same results, but with much less time commitment. So why wouldn't you go down that route? And this argument is really pushed in the fitness world. There's so much information around high intensity training over the last 10 years. There's so many people who really push this agenda, and they say it's good for absolutely everything under the sun. And is a lot of research that at first glance sort of points it to being very effective. And yes, high intensity training is very essential for a mountaineer in certain points of their preparation, but this whole approach isn't quite as simple as many of the high intensity advocates make it out to be. And if you're using this as the majority of your training and you're using it to replace your lower intensity training, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot. And today we're going to be exploring why I believe that. So if you are interested in training for mountaineering, you've probably heard the same few statements repeated to you over and over again. A mountaineer needs long periods of low intensity cardio. A mountaineer needs to develop their aerobic base early on in their training. And aerobic capacity is the single most important aspect of fitness for a mountaineer. If you've been following training for mountaineering for a while, you've probably seen this again and again. Whether you believe it or not, everyone's a little bit different, but you will have seen these. In my opinion, and according to a huge bunch of evidence, this stuff is 100% true, and you cannot be ignoring this. But do you actually understand why this stuff is so important? Do you understand why it's recommended so much by so many professionals out there and endurance coaches out there and mountaineering specialists out there? Do you understand why you need this lower intensity training to maximize your performance on the training? Well, if you're not 100% sure around that, today we're going to be exploring 7 reasons why mountaineers cannot solely rely on high intensity training and why lower intensity training is so important. Now, the benefits of this type of training is definitely not completely limited to these 7 reasons I'm about to explain, but it covers off the main bases we need to talk about. So now that's all said, let's get into it. So number 1 is that lower intensity training leads to structural changes to the cardiovascular system. Now, when I talk about structural changes, what that means is that actually physical changes in the body changing to existing systems in the body. So examples of that include there's denser capillary beds in the trained muscles after long periods of low intensity exercise. Basically, capillaries, the smallest blood vessel in the body, that allows more capillary beds in the trained muscles, leads to more efficient oxygen change between the blood and the muscles, meaning more oxygen go in between the two, meaning you can get more fuel into the working muscles, meaning you can go for longer, for faster, without getting tired. Pretty great. It also increases what's known as mitochondrial mass. So mitochondria are known as the powerhouse of the cells. Basically, they're responsible for the production of what's known as ATP, which is the basic molecule, which is the fuel for every single one of our movements. And it's exactly what exactly what any of our energy systems are producing. Having more mitochondrial mass allows us to produce more ATP, allows us to have more energy and to go for faster, for further, for longer without fatiguing. And it also leads to things like changes in the heart, leading to more blood being able to pump around the body. Now, these are actual changes to the body and actual structural changes to the body, which are very beneficial. And these do mainly come from low intensity, long duration training. On the other hand, high intensity training mainly causes something that's called functional adaptations, which basically change the function of pre-existing structures. So might change some enzyme use or some particular thing in the body, which just changes how those structures function. And that can be very, very beneficial. And that definitely is important for a mountaineer. But if you're not optimizing those structural adaptations, you'll never get anywhere near your potential. Now, on top of this, really, really important point to make is these structural adaptations, which are developed with lower intensity training. There is no real endpoint in developing these. You can train these for weeks, for months, for years, for decades, and continually grow and improve your performance. However, on the other hand, is if you're doing high intensity training, there is a very limited cap for how you can improve these functional adaptations. Meaning, depending on what training you're doing, depending on what protocols you're doing, you might reach your limit in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe a couple of months, and that's probably about it. And if you keep on doing the same type of training again and again and again, trying to push your high intensity stuff and develop these energy systems or these functional adaptations, you're probably not going to really improve that much. So you're going to be putting all this effort in, but you're not going to improve. So finding a combination between the two is really, really important, and making sure that lower intensity stuff over the long term is continued on is absolutely crucial. Now, this is one of the reasons why you see so many older endurance athletes who can literally just hop on a bike and ride for 3 days, or an old school mountaineer who might be able to just go, just walk and walk and walk and hike and hike and hike and climb and climb and climb, because they've spent so many years developing these structural adaptations. So reason number one, bit of a mouthful, a little bit of science down there, but it is very, very important. Lower intensity training leads to structural changes to the cardiovascular system, and high intensity training will mainly lead to functional adaptations. There is some crossover there, absolutely, but that's really the main point. Number two, what we want to talk about is muscle fiber conversion. So in our body, we have what's known as both fast and slow twitch muscle fibers. Fast twitch muscle fibers basically produce quick, explosive movements, but they fatigue very, very quickly. So this might be when we're sprinting, when we're doing a really quick run, might be when we're doing explosive strength training, jumping, stuff like that. Slow twitch muscle fibers, on the other hand, cannot produce as much force, but they're very, very, very fatigue resistant, meaning they're what you use when you're trying to walk all day, hike all day, run all day, swim all day, whatever. And they produce the energy. They're very, very endurance related, meaning they just don't fatigue very, very quickly. The makeup, everyone's born with a certain percentage of these, and everyone will have a certain genetic limitation of how much you can get of each. So some people are, who are natural sprinters, they'll have a very, very high makeup of these fast twitch muscle fibers. Some people will have a very, very high makeup of these slow twitch muscle fibers. Everyone is born a little bit different. And to some extent, you can change the makeup of these. So you can change the percentage of it. So if you're a sprinter, obviously you'd be wanting to increase the percentage of your fast twitch muscle fibers. So that's what the type of training you'd be doing to try and do that. As an endurance athlete, the type of training you want to be doing is to produce more slow twitch muscle fibers and switch those current fast ones over to slow. And basically how that leads out is high intensity exercise will probably lead to more fast twitch muscle fibers, depending how you train it. But it's very, very indisputable that long periods of lower intensity exercise will lead to more slow twitch muscle fibers, because you need to endure, you need to perform for long periods of time. The body wants more to be more fatigue resistant, so develop these slow twitch muscle fibers. So the simple question is, which would you prefer on the mountain? Things that are going to fatigue very, very quickly, or things that are going to perform for long periods of time? Pretty easy answer there. Reason number three, this one is a little bit sciencey, so bear with me, is ATP recycling. So as I said before, ATP is the energy the molecule that fuels all our energy in our body. The ability of the aerobic energy system to recycle ATP to produce energy is one of the most critical factors in endurance performance. So when you use it, how it can reuse the ATP that's been used before to fuel energy, and it goes through a whole bunch of crazy processes, which are well beyond this talk here, but that's basically what we're looking at, recycling ATP. Now, one of the best ways to improve the ability for it to recycle ATP is to deplete the stored carbohydrates or the glycogen that is in the slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, this is best done with long duration, lower intensity training. Now, high intensity training can deplete glycogen in your muscles, but this is mainly in the fast twitch muscle fibers. This type of training is probably too short to see any significant changes to the really, really fatigue resistant and really, really endurance-based slow twitch muscle fibers. So to get that glycogen depletion in those specific fibers, you just need to go for long periods of time. And then that'll lead to the better ability of the body to recycle ATP, to produce more energy, to go for longer, for further without fatiguing. All works out like that. Number 4 is improved fat adaptation. So training long duration exercise, low intensity exercise enhances the ability of the body to use fat as a fuel source at increasingly higher intensities. So let me break this down. Basically, when it comes to fueling our exercise, our body generally will use two things. It'll either use carbohydrates or it will use fat. Now, traditionally, at lower intensities, basically the body prefers to use fat as a fuel source, and the higher the intensity goes and the harder we work, the body starts using more and more and more carbohydrates. And as we get to near maximal intensities, it basically prefers to completely use carbohydrates. There comes a point where these cross over, where it's the utilization of fat becomes less than the utilization of carbohydrates, and that's known in technical terms as the crossover point. Now, as an endurance athlete, one really, really big benefit is if you can improve the ability of the body to use fat as a fuel source, meaning you can work at higher intensities, but still use a higher percentage of fat, that's going to be incredibly beneficial. And that's what you want to be looking for. That's a really, really good benefit for a mountaineer. Now, particularly as a mountaineer, when it comes down to you're going to be going for long periods of time, you might be limited in your food intake. You might have massive summit days where you just cannot eat at all. This is going to be really, really important for you. Now, two big benefits from all of this. Number one is the body has huge stores of potential energy in fat. So we carry body fat that can all be potentially mobilized. And if you become more efficient at using this, you're going to have a lot more energy available to you. So this reduces the reliance on our limited stores of glycogen, which are stored carbohydrate during exercise. And we can only store a very, very limited amount of carbohydrate at a time. So we need to constantly replenish this. Now, in day-to-day life or in most sports, that's not really a massive issue. But as a mountaineer, as I said before, if you're on your feet for multiple hours at a time, if your food sources are limited, then you might being able to use this potential energy in fat is going to be very much beneficial. On top of that, the metabolism of fat for energy does not lead to the production of lactate, which is a very, very good thing as a mountaineer. Now, when we're using glycogen as a fuel source or carbohydrates as a fuel source, at some point, potentially you can produce lactate and produce the associated hydrogen ions, which can lead to early fatigue. And we've all felt that burning in the muscles and all of that. If you're using fat as a fuel source, it's going to reduce the chance of this happening, basically. So, using fat is a very, very positive thing. Now, you're never going to entirely use fat for energy production during exercise. It is very, very rare to get up to these higher intensities. Generally, for a general population, there'll come a point around maybe 65% or 70% of your max heart rate or your max intensity, I should say, in which you'll start using carbohydrates quite a bit more. If you're a highly trained endurance athlete, you might shift that up to something like, 85% of your intensity. If you're really, really highly trained, I think there's been some extreme cases where someone's up at like 90% and they're still using fat as a fuel source. But even saying this, you're never going to get entirely fat dependent. But improving this ability, even a small amount, can be very, very beneficial for a mountaineer. Now, this whole process is generally much greater enhanced with some dietary manipulation, but we'll cover that in another time. But if you don't even want to think about nutrition, the simple fact, if you're doing low intensity, long duration cardio, that's going to be better, improving your body's ability to use fat as a fuel source, as opposed to high intensity cardio, where if you're just doing that, or majority of doing that, you're just going to be very, very carbohydrate reliant. So next one, connective tissue resilience. It's number 5. So as a mountaineer, your tendons and ligaments and all your connective tissue and your muscles, for that matter, fact, just need to be able to withstand force over long periods of time. Meaning you're going to be on your feet for hours and hours and hours and hours. You're going to be climbing, you're going to be hiking, you're going to be doing whatever, and you just need to be able to sustain and deal with this. Not just in an energy sense, but actually from a muscular and connective tissue sense. Now, while strength training is probably the best way of going about this to develop strength in the connective tissues, long periods of aerobic exercise is also important here. Simply put, this exposes the connective tissue to this very, very specific stimulus of you being on your feet, moving for long periods of time, causing it to adapt and strengthen. Now, it's pretty common sense. If you want to protect your body from getting sore and getting hurt from being on the mountain and going for long periods of time, you need to get your body used to it. It's common sense there. So it's really hard to argue that. And then as you increase the duration of your cardio, which is generally what you're going to be doing, this will be a slight new stimulus and will keep the strengthening process going. So it keeps on getting new stimulus as you go longer, as you go further, as you get fitter, and it continues to progress. Now, short duration cardio is just not specific enough here to prepare your connective tissue for long days on the mountain. It's pretty common sense. An hour in the gym is probably not gonna, of doing cardio, I should say, is not gonna prepare your connective tissue for 12 hours on a summer day. You need to be doing your long duration cardio, and that's pretty straightforward. Number 6 is mental strength. So mental strength is often overlooked and it's not really dove into very much, but we all know it's an incredibly important aspect for any mountaineer, whether you're just doing a short climb or an outrageously long climb, whether you're in terrible weather conditions or easy weather conditions, whether it's a super difficult climb or a moderately easy climb for you, mental strength is always going to be important. Now, some might argue that doing a 40-minute hardcore CrossFit session in which you'll run into the ground is great for mental toughness. And in that certain situation, yeah, probably is. But there is a big difference between surviving a workout in a gym for 40 minutes and embracing the suck doing exercise, endurance exercise for 12 hours. A massive difference, very different. And people can hold on to anything for 40 minutes. You know, you see regular gym goers being able to hold on to anything for 40 minutes. If you're preparing for a mountaineering adventure, you need to get specific as you can here. To prepare for a mountaineering trip, you need to train your mind to be comfortable for moving for long periods of time over different terrain in different weather conditions. You just need your mind to be ready as well as your body. And the easiest way to do this is just get as specific as you can, move for long periods, get used to that feeling, get used to daydreaming, get used to dealing with those aches and pains, get used to dealing with that discomfort, get used to dealing with like talking in your head when the weather's getting bad and you want to give up, and just get used to that situation. And if you're doing, you know, maybe one long session a week or one session every 2 weeks, that's probably not enough to get yourself comfortable with it. The more you can do here, really, the better. So if you can do twice a week of long duration cardio, that's going to be much better. Next one, and the final one I want to talk about today, is recovery rates. So recovery bouts between bouts of exercise. So for example, in between intervals or in between sessions is really greatly affected by your aerobic capacity and your aerobic fitness, which your aerobic capacity is developed with long duration cardio. Simply put, the better your recovery in these higher intensity sessions, the better you'll be able to perform in your training. So if you are doing your interval training and you just cannot recover, you're heaving, absolutely heaving and huffing and really struggling in between intervals, that means your performance is going to drop every single interval you do, meaning you're not going to get all the benefits out of that session and you're going to struggle. However, if you have a big aerobic capacity and you've been doing this long duration training and your body can recover properly in between intervals or optimally between intervals, you're going to be able to perform at your best every single interval, work at your hardest and get the best benefits out of that type of training. So really, if you don't have enough aerobic capacity before you start doing high intensity training and during your high intensity training, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot because you won't be able to work as hard as you need to and you won't be able to get the results you want there. So that's a very important point to make. So to wrap things up today, hopefully now you are aware of just how important long duration, lower intensity cardio is for a mountaineer. While some amount of high intensity training is important in your training, and there's no arguing there, and that's not what I'm saying, you cannot consider it as a replace for your low intensity work. So if you are a super busy corporate mountaineer and you can't get out for a run once a week or a hike once a week, you need to have a think about where you can fit something in. You can't rely on the high intensity stuff to get you through all the way. You need to be fitting something into your week regularly. If you do struggle to fit these sessions into your week and you would much prefer to be spending 40 minutes in a CrossFit box than 4 hours a bike, hopefully this talk can be a bit of a lecture point, a bit of a turning point for you, I should say. Do the right things in your training and you really will be thankful on the mountain and it will pay off over the long term. So if you have enjoyed this video lecture today, if you have gotten a bit of information out of it and you are sort of thinking you do want a little bit of extra help with your preparations, you want to learn a little bit more and discover how you can be the fittest, the strongest and the most resilient mountaineer that you can possibly be, you can find my online training program for mountaineers at summitstrength.com.au. online-mountaineer. You can check out the online summit program, which has helped many mountaineers in many different situations get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. So thank you so much for listening today, guys. I hope you learned a lot, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.